So I've been working on this thing called Tamagui for the last couple of years, I guess, really, but it's kind of like a full stack, like component kit style system, and like optimizing compiler that kind of, I think, one of the big, I think, problems in building a cross-platform app that runs on native and web is that you end up with either sacrificing a lot, like sacrificing the intuitiveness of how do you style, and then, or if you do get a really nice style library, then you end up sacrificing performance because that style library has so many abstractions. And so that's what Tamagui is trying to solve, is like, if I can have a nice style syntax, but also not have it be like terribly slow on the web and use actual like web primitives, that would be the dream. So trying to make it work. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like a high level view.
This is a pretty awesome endeavor. So when I worked at Artsy, we had a React Native app and a web app, and we tried to do sort of the same thing. So their design system palette is we wanted to share across platforms and eventually just split them. But it's interesting because you're right. There's a lot of interesting challenges. So like we had evaluated like React Native Web back in the early days, and that there are just a lot of trade-offs, and some of the old solutions were pretty clunky. So I'm curious. Had you tried this before, like on some product that you were working on before you started Tamaguri, and sort of what led you to the approaches that you've taken so far?
Yeah, so I mean, in a sense, I've worked on this a few times. Like I think Tamagui, you could consider it almost my third or fourth try at some sort of like UI system like this. But I was working on something that was similar to React Native before React Native exists, but it was more similar to Cordova maybe, but like really trying to replicate the iOS look and feel like almost perfectly, just using like React, which was very complicated. So that was kind of a first attempt. And then I met up with a co-founder through that, and we raised money through like really good investors. I moved to the Bay. I never lived, in San Francisco or anything, but I moved to the Bay to do that startup. It was a dev tools focused startup. And it was also had like, I mean, it was a little bit more ambitious. It was maybe like we modified, we actually modified JavaScript. We took Babel and forked it and added like a view keyword. And then inside of there, you have these reactive variables, and there was a whole compiler set up. It was a little bit like like Svelte. I think it was like 3 years before Svelte existed. There's a cool demo video on YouTube. I can link it. It was called Motion, and we actually built it out. It was really interesting. Like the HMR was as you typed, like it was so fast. You could like tweak values in real time. It had a compiler that pulled out CSS from like dynamic values even. So it had like kind of that similar idea behind it. And it just didn't end up going anywhere for various reasons. But one cool like side note from that is that when we first were showing that demo video off to people, we started getting like kind of a bunch of people in our Slack at the time, and like a bunch of people were getting interested. And I remember like Evan Yu of Vue joined our Slack, and he was like, this was like, I think before Vue even was called Vue or something. It was like, maybe it was version 1 or pre-version 1. And he's like, can I take some of these ideas? And we were like, yeah, go for it. So it was kind of cool. Like, I think, we didn't end up launching the project, but there was some influences, I think, down the road that it had on the ecosystem. So, but yeah, long story short is that I definitely have tried this a few times. I was booting up a new project at the end of the pandemic, and it needed to have native support. So I was kind of like, well, I had this UI kit. The last version of it that I had tried, which was just for an app before that I was working on, it had gotten too bloated, and it had gotten kind of like, I had thrown in it's really hard to design these things because down the road you try and like do something, and then you end up like realizing that the whole fundamental design, like, the whole CSS problem of like merging styles down, cascading styles, it was like, I was trying to get it to like be very correct, and I just literally couldn't fix some of these features. And so I had to rewrite it using atomic styles. And then I realized that some of the way I had done some of the features in that last UI kit, the styling system, the wouldn't really work with atomic styles, or at least I ended up in this giant mess of a refactor where I was like, you know what, at this point, I'm just going to bail on that one. So yeah, so then Tamagui was kind of like, okay, let me start over again, of course. And I grabbed JSX style, which was this library that had already existed that had a compiler, because I kind of knew that like if I'm going to bridge native and web, it's like it already was like my UI kits were already slow just doing web only without a compiler. So it's like it's even more so needed it. And so that was kind of the genesis of the library.
So, like For our listeners who don't actually know, like, how does it like work in the end? Like, what is rendering to native, and like, how do you translate that to web also?
Yeah, so it's basically it was originally running on React Native Web. So same API surface as React Native and React Native Web. So you basically have a limited set of style properties that are they're basically identical to web style properties, but like they're just limited. You don't have stuff like backdrop filter and these type of like more fancy props. But you have like all the basics. And yeah, originally I just built off of React Native Web, and even rendered to that. But there was multiple things that were sort of like making that very difficult over time. One was that just React Native Web refused to support class name, and we're compiling to Atomic CSS, and so it's like, how do if I can't pass in a class name? I literally was patching. Like I had a script that would go into your node modules and patch React Native Web to make it work with class name for the first like 6 or year or something of like Tamagui existing, before when it was actually called something else and it was very small. But eventually I was like, this is, it's just like I can't really rely on, they closed the issue saying like, we're not going to support it, which was in my mind a kind of a mistake. And there's, at the end of the day, if you don't control the whole fundamental styling system of your library, then it's kind of so I ended up slowly like moving it off. It was a huge amount of effort, but now it's basically its own style library. It's native, runs on native and web. Like on native, it outputs to like a style sheet.create or just objects basically, and it passes those objects in as a style property. And then on web, the one big thing behind Tamagui is that it's not like zero runtime on purpose, just because setting up a compiler and a compile step is always such a big commitment and a risk almost too, because like you have to trust that like this compile time process is working. And I wanted it to be easier to like run without it. So like it runs completely at runtime as well as at compile time. So you can just plug it in without any compiler setup and use it, and it'll output class names, but it generates the CSS and inserts them on the fly or at startup, kind of depending on if you use like a styled component versus an inline style. But then if you do plug in the compiler, it will analyze, everything, and it'll pull out CSS at build time and do a bunch of other nice things too, kind of optimize and a few other things that we can get into.
So I'm assuming React Native Web didn't want to support class name because like there is no like native version of that on React Native. So like, did you have to solve it the opposite way too? Now that you have class names, do you have to make those work on the native components? And like, is that like a subset of CSS basically?
It's a good question. But the answer is just really like that the class name just is no op basically on native. I mean, class name is basically an escape hatch for web, which I actually use it all the time. It's nice. You can just go write some CSS. Like you can add your own little like add-ons, like Tailwind style almost. Like I just add a bunch of little things that aren't supported through the React Native like official API, and I use class name as my like way to target web. Now there is like a platform selector where you can do platform web and platform native and platform iOS and do like specific styles to each one. But still you don't get like, that's still limited to the style properties that it supports. So yeah, it's a no op on web. Expo's working on some interesting stuff right now. They seem to have gotten like a CSS working for native, and they're working on, and I think they built that in order to get like some Tailwind type stuff working for native, so you can do like Tailwind class names, and it's also a limited subset of CSS, and from what I understand, it also doesn't cascade, so there's no C, just CS. But yeah, so there's some differences there, but it seems like we may get some sort of like form of CSS. The whole point of Tamagui is kind of not to do CSS. Like I'm a big inline styles maxi, like even like Tailwind, right? It kind of admits like you're sort of avoiding. Like I like the component, like React component model combined with like local styles I think is a really beautiful setup. So it's kind of funny to see that happening, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions in this space. I've done lots of design system stuff, and I do like Tailwind, and I also like scoped CSS modules. I think they really mix well together. Like when you're designing components, you don't want to design some things in like sometimes width or spacing or all these other things. And I think utility class names are like such a nice bullet for that. But you could easily argue that if they were just like style properties like you have, it would work just the same. But like combining those two things, I think creates like the most ergonomic design system for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually people say like, can we get like some Tailwind support in Tamagui, and that's possible. Like I definitely have been thinking about adding like a library that's kind of like maps Tailwind. so you can just use like the exact same props. It probably would be good for adoption and stuff. But the inline props, especially because there's a concept of shorthands in Tamagui. I mean, you can basically get the exact same experience where it's MX equals like whatever, you know, P or all the different like shorthands. The default ones that we have are basically the same. Kind of like same idea. And what I like is that you get types too. So you get like it's you know, TypeScript, auto completes with your just editor without any sort of special plugin. There's so many benefits. I mean, like you can like, you know, destructure them as props and then play with them and change them and then put them back onto props, and like you also get like nice merging, I think, with Tamagui, which is, I have to plug a little bit, but yeah, you get nice merging, which is like the order of the props is important. So that was like a big realization at some point, because for example, we have variants. I don't know, I don't want to like get too in the weeds maybe if people aren't familiar, but like if anyone who's worked with stitches, it's just a way to like expand. I'm sure maybe Tailwind has something like this too, where you can like shorthand for like an expanded amount of styles. Maybe they don't, I don't know, but basically like you can have a shorthand that's like, you know, huge or something like, and if it's set to true, then it expands to be like, you know, set the radius, set a bunch of other properties, maybe the scale. But the problem is then like you want to be able to control that and like override, say, like if I want to override, like expand that, but then override one thing. I realized at one point that like as long as you make the prop order significant to the styling system, so you can have huge, and then the next line you could have like maybe set the border top right radius to 0 if you just want to have like a sharp edge or something like that. And so that was kind of like a big thing and it lets you do this really nice thing where you can kind of like have an API service where your component lets external users override some styles, but then like maybe you control the rest of the styles and stuff like that.